Hey guys, this is Dr. Quaz, and today we're finally going to be able to make the baby tank build video so that anyone out there who doesn't want to buy it from me and just wants to build it for yourself, which I actually do recommend, learn how to build your own drones, guys. It's going to save you a lot of money and time down the road. I do appreciate the people who purchase the drones from me over on drquads.com, and so I'm going to use that opportunity to show you guys how to build your own baby tank from start to finish, because I actually haven't done anything. I do realize I haven't made a guide on how to print these, and it's mostly because everyone that has a different printer will need different settings, and that's a bit too broad for me to actually give people advice on. There are a few things I can say is that when it comes to the shell, I use 2 walls, and when it comes to this little AIO thing here, I use 4 because this needs to be pretty strong, whereas this mostly just needs to be really light. When it comes to the prop guards, you're gonna wanna print these things as thin as you can, because if you're using Polymax, as you should, it's got more than enough thickness and strength as long as it's held together and you can kind of feel that it's held together. You don't mind so much if this breaks, because remember, these are really cheap to replace if you learn how to do it yourself and you have a 3D printer, and you could print thousands from one spool of Polymax, which may be expensive as far as filament goes, but if you're using it like I do and not for just 3D printing a bunch of figurines and stuff like that, I only use my 3D printing for printing drone parts, so it's vastly cheaper than doing anything like buying it from GetRC or iFlight. This is the way to go, guys, and I'm telling you right now, the strength of this is insane. Now, what's pretty awesome about this, besides the fact that it's a cinematic drone, an actual cinematic drone. I'm so tired of people saying cinematic drone, and no, it's not. Anyways, what's really awesome about this drone is that it's really easy to repair. I made this with all of the knowledge I have of building the Sea Dragon and the Mecha Roach. Now, those were great drones, they flew great, but they were kind of a nightmare, especially the Sea Dragon, which I will be redoing soon. But the Sea Dragon was just really, really tough to repair, convoluted to put together. So I didn't want to do that again. This drone right here is an absolute breeze. In fact, you can take off this entire top piece after you unscrew 6 screws, take it off, and then there's your air unit up here with your antenna. Put that aside, and then right in front of you is your AIO with all your motors. Right, so you can just desolder a motor without having to unscrew anything else at all, replace the motor, and then put back on the top with 6 screws. The second thing that's really awesome about this drone is that all the PLA parts can print on one sheet pretty easily. If you see here, I kind of designed it like this, where you can put them together like that and then print on one sheet, and all the TPU parts, of course, can print on one sheet. So it's just 2 prints that you need to print the baby tank. Now, you do need to get a carbon fiber plate cut. I hope, if I'm selling enough of these one day, I might ship like 100 of them out to America, maybe find someone who's willing to kind of sell them for me so that they can be sold at a really cheap price and not have to pay the cost of shipping from China. But it should be not too hard for you to find somebody to cut this with a CNC machine. I'm sure there's a service out there in America. It won't be too expensive. There's 3 parts to the PLA, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 feet, a little holder for your antenna, which, by the way, this one did not print so well. I'm gonna have to maybe redesign that after this video is done to make it easier to sit on the bed, because I printed it where it was like standing straight up and it just didn't have the support due to TPU. So don't worry about that. I'll get that replaced. And then, of course, here is your ELRS or Crossfire holder. If you're just using DJI, then you don't need to worry about this. You don't need to print this, save yourself the weight. But if you are using ELRS or Crossfire, this little thing sits on the back or the front and puts your RX right in here, and then it holds your antenna in between those. Now, you do need a battery foot little holder thing. This does 2 things. One, it kind of sandwiches in between the carbon fiber plate, and that creates a tighter seal on the battery to the carbon fiber plate, so there's no jiggling and wiggling of the battery. But also, it's gonna protect your battery with these little feet, and actually, due to the baby tank's very strict design, these feet actually don't touch the ground. These feet are so small, they're mostly just for if it impacts on the side or something, it's not gonna break your carbon fiber plate or scratch or something like that. This is for a bad landing, whereas most of the time, you're gonna be landing on this thing right here. Of course, you need 4 motors, and then you need a bunch of little screws, and on the website, I will list out all the screws that you need. So if you wanna know exactly what screws you need and you don't have like a big box of screws like I do, then I'll have that for you as well. Okay, so the first thing you actually wanna do is you wanna prepare your prop guards and just make sure that these stacks are going in fine. Now, this is still a little bit tight. I might have to make it looser. It's fine if it's too tight, because you can kind of force it in. There is some flex in the filament, but that does mean that it will be a little bit harder to take apart. I didn't want this to be wiggling around. I wanted it to be rock solid, and so you will have to kind of force the standoffs into their holes by screwing them in, going slow, feeling once it's tight enough, and then backing it out. Now the downside to that is that obviously it's gonna be a lot tougher to take off these prop guards if you need to replace them. The upside is I believe there'll be a lot better resonance and vibration characteristics of the drone. And if you wanna take this thing apart, you can just unscrew it actually from the carbon fiber plate, or you can just blast it with heat real quick. And then it comes right out. Okay, now that you have those in there, you also want to do the same thing for the M2s. Now that you have that done, now you're going to flip it over and you're going to screw the bottom on. But you're only going to screw in 2 screws to this bottom part because you will have to take it off in a little bit. It's mostly just to keep everything in place. It's a very robust frame. It's not weak at all. It is sub 250, just barely. Because I could make this carbon fiber plate 2 millimeters instead of 2.5 millimeters, but then I believe that you would be suffering from some warbles from the motors. This is the tough part about drone building that most people don't understand. You know, when it comes to drones from GEP-RC or Beta FPV, they're going to give you the cheapest possible acceptable drone that you can have, and they're gonna skimp on areas that I believe should not be skimped on. So when it comes to AIOs, if you're not using the HackRC 40 amp AIO, what are you doing with your life? This thing is unbelievable, even over a more expensive AIO, which by the way, this thing is one of the cheapest AIOs out there. And I don't mean cheap in the sense of quality, I mean cheap in the sense of how do they sell it for this price? Well, I'll tell you how they sell it for a price. They're selling it at a loss. And that's one of the reasons why I'm in love with HackRC, because they've kind of tickled that part of me that talks about the Takamar so much, the Takamar 50. And that's that kind of company, that magical kind of company that makes that quality, that wants to compete against somebody else and win, not just for money, but for the pride as an engineer and as a man and as a company to have. And so that's what this was. HackRC's really biggest push into any FPV or flight controller market, which by the way, they don't just do flight controllers, they're kind of like an electronics manufacturing. Their big breakaway into this, they told me, they were selling these at a loss. They have to be. The quality is fantastic. They use Japanese-made capacitors for good filtering. Like all the specs are perfect. The gyro is really nice. Nothing is cheaped out. No corners were cut, and yet it's one of the most cheap. And I almost kind of feel like that was a mistake, because then it's like people think that it's cheap. But I'll tell you right now, like even over a more expensive, 2 times more expensive AIO, I will choose these any day of the week. And I bought these with my own money. HackRC did not send these to me. I did buy them at cost, just to be fair, but yeah, these things are fantastic, and I want to have a stockpile of them because anytime a customer orders a drone that's under 5 inches, that's what's going inside. I am testing out their new upgraded version of that right now, but I was having a bit of an issue in Betaflight with the dual gyro setup. I don't think that's HackRC's problem. That's mostly they just got to work with Betaflight and figure it out to where it's perfect. The next thing you want to do is you want to screw your motors on, cut the wires to length, and then pre-tin them. I've already done that, so I don't have to do that, but that's pretty standard procedure. I'm trying to remember to go in order. It actually doesn't matter if you go in order, but I know it will help you guys a lot if I do. So you get some M2 7mm screws, and this is the most tedious part of the whole build, and that's screwing them all through these little TPU feet. Okay, sorry about that. I had to do another order of some screws because I realized that it's not M27s, it's actually M26. The M27s were poking up just a little bit too far. Yep, M26 it is. Nice and snug. Okay, so the next thing you would want to do is you want to get 4 little heat set insets, stick them down in there. It's a beautiful fit. It's a perfect fit. I've really nailed this one out of the park. Biggest advice I can give you on this right here is don't go down too far because you don't want to melt it from the other side. Okay. Fast in, fast out. That's what you want. Now you do want to let this cool. You can kind of feel that they're pretty hot, and you don't want to manipulate it because you'll deform the plastic. Yeah, that looks about right. M210 is what you need. So what you'll do now is you put this AIO unit right there, back the screw out, let it sit flush, bring the screw back in. I like to apply a little bit of pressure, and then that should be very tight. I made this to be very strong, very tight. You want this to be rigid so that the shock from a crash will not reverberate into the AIO unit. And there you go. So this is the basic structure of pretty much all the drones that I build right now. The AIO goes on top and the battery slots in on the bottom. And this seems to work exceptionally well. I've never quite had a drone fly like I've had these fly. So I'm sticking with this design. I'm not gonna change it. What's more is the way that I've done the prop guards and how it all screws down onto the carbon fiber frame. You get two things. The AIO actually never directly touches like a hard connection to the motors and the carbon fiber. So the translation of vibration is going to be a lot, let's say isolated or dampened by the time it actually gets to the AIO. The next thing you want to do is actually set up your AIO, because it's going to be easier to screw this in and get everything ready before you actually lock it to the carbon fiber frame. So if you want now, you can actually solder your battery leads and then get the gummy height correct. Now these gummies seem to be too short, so I'll have to put some spacers on them. So now I do believe that M210s will be good. I try to think of every little thing. As you can see, I added a little slot right there so that you can put the head of the M2 screw through it and then screw through it. Little tiny things like this I see a lot of other bigger drone designers don't do, and that just makes me realize that they don't really care about their customer. Because if you care about your customer, you're gonna be thinking about his experience, and not just trying to get his money. All right, there you go. And so let's get the AIO on there and just double check that it's all looking good. And make sure that that bottom piece is not touching. Oh, that's absolutely perfect. I'm very happy with that. I think using just a little bit of Loctite on these, it's not a bad idea, but I never do, and I've never had a problem. So, take that with a grain of salt. That is just anecdotal, that's my experience. Okay, fantastic. So AIO is perfectly sitting on there. And now we just gonna take this, and the fun part is getting these motor wires up through this little hole in the center. I would say this is probably the one thing that can't be really fixed as far as a bad experience. This is not fun, I'm gonna be honest with you. Definitely get yourself some surgeon's tools to make it a little easier. Now I'm a little OCD about my motor wires. I want them to be flat. I don't want them crossing over each other. So I like to do that now. And then give it just the right amount of slack. Now, there is one little advice I can give you, is you want to make sure that your motor wires are kind of going directly down. Don't have them sticking out, because then when you need to take the prop guards off, it can be a little bit more difficult. And if you have a little bit of ice creaming, don't worry too much, but do take some snippers and kind of make sure that it's relatively smooth. I find it pretty difficult to get perfect solder blobs on this because I'm having to manipulate the cable so much to make sure that it's straight down. Okay, all the motor wires are soldered on nicely, and as you can see, this is what I was talking about at the beginning. When you actually take off the air unit with just a few screws, you take it off and boom, this is what you're left with. Almost like a platform for you to solder everything and desolder, replace a motor. It's fantastic. I really like this design because it makes repairing and building and just general maintenance very easy and very convenient. And now you want to make sure that your motor wires are where you want them to be before you go ahead and finalize this by screwing in the M2 screw into the M2 strut. Obviously you should be doing this on a soft pad because I'm putting my AIO face down. Don't do this on a hard surface or like a stone surface or something. You might damage your AIO. And and then screw in your M3s. Okay, really great to have a torque driver just to make sure that you don't over tighten something or under tighten it. And there we go, this is looking really nice. The capacitor is gonna be a tight fit, so you might wanna leave a little bit of slack on it, or just, I know exactly this is gonna fit, because when the air unit goes on top, and then of course the battery comes from the bottom, there's not a lot of room. I made it pretty much just enough space. I didn't wanna waste a bunch of space, and of course that means weight. For this particular build, I'm gonna be using the ELRS tiny module because saving weight is really important, and this really isn't gonna be a long range drone, so this should be more than good enough for the range that you're gonna be getting with the O3 anyways. Okay, and I did miss a step that is optional, but that is to actually paint this with a little bit of gold kind of accent. And it's also a good time to check and make sure that these prop guards are gonna come up okay. So unscrew your AIO. Okay, and as you can see, this will come right off. Boom. These struts will come with it because they're a little tight. If you make it a little bit bigger, they won't come with it. It might be a little bit easier to repair. However, I believe that it might add some vibration, so that wasn't too hard. What we're gonna do is we're gonna try to paint just, oh, look at that. I missed some supports there. Good thing I noticed that. We're gonna try to paint just the edges, because normally you want this actually to be drier than when I have it, and you don't wanna use as much of the gold wax paint as I'm using, because then it will just overwhelm the whole thing. But I'm just trying to get a really strong accent on the corners. So be careful not to try to paint the flat surfaces too much. And once you're kind of done painting the edges, you can kind of just be really light. The more you do this, the drier your brush will get, so the more kind of safe it will be. All right, back to it. Get this here. To put the prop guards back on, or if you're replacing the prop guards, what you actually want to do is put this on first, and then I always like to put the AIO on, just so that the AIO is in place. Oh, sorry, before that you want to get your M2 struts back in there. It's gonna save you some time. Should bite. Yeah, as you screw in your AIO in, make sure that it bites, otherwise you'll be forcing the AIO holder down, and that's not good. I mean, it should be fine, but you just don't want to add any stress cracks or something like that to it. There we go, that's biting. Yeah, I'm sorry, that is one thing, guys. If you order any colors from my store, just know that I will kind of reserve the right to change the color if I have to, because I want to give you the best quality product, and sometimes different filaments print differently, and also painting them is different. So I might end up making an executive decision to not give you the color that you ordered. Just know that that's the case. Okay, there we go. Next part we're gonna do is we're gonna put this aside. It's time for the DJI Air 03, which is a fantastic, the best. Most of my builds, I only use one and it's okay, but here in Guangdong, China, so hot. So I like to use two for this build. You can actually get away with using one if you're really trying to save weight. No, it's 1.3 grams. So you could save 1.3 grams, but I don't find it to be useful. These are very important to keep the air unit really cool, because you don't want to overheat your air unit, because that will damage the air unit. Okay, now you're gonna force this up through. It should be just fine. You guys gotta appreciate how many tries it took me to get that just right to fit in there. And if you are, for visuals, you definitely want to cut all these little strings away that kind of pop up through. So you have two heat sinks on the top that are going to be connected, and this is actually where your air unit will be touching. So you can use two pads, or if you're buying it like in the long strips, you can actually just cut one pad to go across the top. Well, you actually can look here now, because you need to make sure that you have the USB port correct. So what you're going to do is have it tilted to the side, and yes, indeed, it's going to go with the DJI logo touching the top. So that's the way it goes. Now, but unfortunately, you actually have to unscrew it, because you have to screw through the top of the case. However, if you unscrew it, this little top frame here will come loose, and it's super annoying. So what you actually want to do now is you want to get a little bit of E7000, just a tiny bit. And that's, you're going to put just a tiny, tiny little bit on the sides and on this thing right here, just to hold it in place. so that it doesn't fall apart. Now this, if you really want this to come off, it won't take too much prying to get it off. You won't damage anything. That's just to kind of keep it from falling up and falling off. And you could put a little bit right here too, because this stuff is pretty good at silicone base, so it's not gonna, you know, lock shut and cause like a catastrophic binding. Not that you should ever need to take this apart, to be honest. Just, you know, once that's dried, then you can put it in there and it's not gonna be like falling apart on you. Now, this thing here goes right up through this slot, and it's a little stiff, so just kind of wiggle jiggle and it goes right through there. And then you're gonna carefully put this up in there, slot it all the way, kind of move it around. You know, you kind of gotta manipulate it just a little bit because the cords are gonna be in your way. And bam, there we go. Once you line it up, now comes the fun part. You're gonna need 3 of these M1.6 10 millimeters. And these are M1.6 14 millimeters. So 10 and 14. The reason why you need a 14 is because the 14 will actually be going through the TPU section of this right here, so it needs to be a little bit longer, whereas the 10 millimeters is just fine for everything else. So you're just gonna screw this in here a bit. The only ones I found had a weird head, which is super annoying. Hopefully in the future I can find ones that don't have a weird head, but it's okay because you shouldn't be unscrewing this a lot anyways. You need 1.27. This is why I hate this, and hopefully I can find standardized screws, because there we go. So it's 1.27, super annoying. Okay, and as soon as you know that it's biting for sure, you actually don't want to screw it in all the way, because due to the nature of how that sits on the heat sink, it's not gonna be, you can't actually tighten like to your heart's content. You have to tighten it kind of carefully in sets, 2 corners then 2 corners. Now this one should bite perfectly due to the fact that those are the 2 corners already there. Okay, now you want to visually inspect it, because you'll see what I'm talking about when you look in there, that there's actually distance from the top and the screw, so you can't actually just tighten it all the way, but that's okay. Take your time. You actually take this here and you open it up and stick that through, right? And you can adjust this. Now, you can cut this. You can cut this part here if you want it really short, or if you want it long. It kind of depends on you, but then you're gonna stick that in there, and it should be a tight fit because you want it to be tight. Just get that in there, kind of smush it in all sides. It's TPU, so it'll have some give. Get that in place. You're gonna take your longer one, and then you're gonna need to put a one of these like M2, I think these are called countersunk washers or something like that, because that's gonna make sure that this doesn't go through the TPU, because the head on these 1.6 is just so small. You don't want that to go through the TPU, because the TPU will give way to it, let's say. Before you start screwing all the way in, you wanna make sure that it is biting indeed. And we're good, so I hear it biting now. Okay, and now you just wanna take turns, which is very annoying because you have to use 2. But take turns kind of screwing it in until you feel like it's tight enough. There's no wiggle. If you tighten it up enough, we'll kind of bow up a little bit because the plastic will kind of deform, but that's okay, that's okay. Mostly just visually make sure that this is not cockeyed. Raise this up a bit and slot this in here, slot it in, and push it back down and try to line up everything. Right, there we go. Now we can kind of like manipulate this back and forth. Make sure that it has some slack. You don't want the cord, oh here, let me show you a little bit. Make sure that this has slack. You don't want the cord smushed. You want it to be like this. You don't want it to be like smushed, because if it's pressing down on it, it's not good. Now, I can say that if this little part here sticks up so that when you want to take the prop guards off, you can't, so you do have to unplug it to get the prop guards out, but that's okay. Not too bad. And here's the thing, you're almost done. All you have to do is solder your ELRS and you're done. This is super annoying. The only silicone female versions of this connector that I could find were all black. They didn't have the color coding. So just note that you're gonna have to like visually inspect where they are. It's super, super annoying. So we're just gonna kind of visually give it a little bit of slack is okay. Right about there. So now we're gonna cut it to length. I would say like that. Boom, cut that to length and that should be pretty good. but for ELRS, it's okay. All right. I did actually kind of forget to put this on the frame, so, you know, just remember that you'll need to put this this little guy right here. You might actually, I might be able to kind of manhandle it in. Oh, of course, it's gonna come right out. Now I am going to screw in the M3 section here. So there we go, we are looking pretty good. Just kind of giving a visual inspection of things as I'm closing it down. As far as the ELRS holder goes, some builds I do it and some builds I don't. But often I've just actually been cutting this little section right here so that you can place the wire down in there without having to desolder it or something like that. It saves you a lot of time. Now you do want to wrap this up in some heat shrink. All right, it's time to go ahead and check to see if everything's working great. Gonna plug this into a smoke stopper for sure, just to stop any funny business from happening. All right, that's the sound we like to hear. Then we're gonna plug it into Betaflight and make sure that the ELRS is working. You're gonna get an M310 and stick it into one of these countersunks here. Whenever you're going through TPU, you really should be using a countersunk washer so that you know, you're not eating into the TPU. There we go. One last visual inspection. You just don't want to have any cords crimped up when you tighten it for that final real tightness, because then you might damage something. Okay, tighten that down pretty good. Looking good. I'm gonna go ahead and just hand tighten these as well. So to go down into here, you're gonna need some M210s, I believe. And unfortunately, you will be having to use this because of how flush it is with the side of the drone, unless you have a really long head on your automatic driver. Now, one thing I did forget to do for the first time I flew this drone was actually to screw in these as well. You need some M3.5s, which I think are actually over here. One last little thing too is make sure that you got your USBs right. The flight controller's down there and the air unit's right there. And you should be able to access those with the USB plug-in, not too difficultly. I really like how this kind of came out. HackRC, and I mean, just everything I do with HackRC seems to work perfectly. So, oops, I totally forgot there's one last thing, and of course that might add a couple grams here, but you've got to actually take a piece of this kind of Velcro double-sided battery strap stuff, slot it up in through here, get one of these, which I'll have a link to these little metal buckles in the description. And then you're gonna wrap that around. Try to make it as tight as possible because you don't want to have any slack, because the smallest battery strap that I could find was these diatones. And it's like with the 650 battery, they're almost too long. But so yeah, if you make this really tight here, that's gonna help you out a lot in kind of relieving some of that slack. Then you're gonna take your battery strap and go from the other side. Make sure to move apart your motor wires. You don't wanna go through the motor wires. Move those to the side. And then, oh, definitely have the battery strap flip to the right direction. Okay. All the way down. Go through, and you're done. And so that's how you're gonna strap your battery on. It's just like that. Now you wanna take this out and put your battery protector through this strap. And it's pretty stiff because I didn't want it flopping around. So you might have to use some needle nose pliers or something to get that through there. Then do one more thing. There's one last little thing here is on the inside, you actually want to put some battery gummy. So you're gonna have to just buy like a sheet of the battery gummy stuff and then custom kind of cut it and then just glue it down in there. Now this stuff is actually the gummy stuff that you use for your car to keep your cell phone from sliding around. And it's exactly the same stuff that is the grip, but for a fraction of the cost. Well guys, here it is. When it comes to the flight characteristics of this, oh, I am blown away. My expectations have been far and above exceeded. Now my own personal baby tank, because this is not mine, I have one, and it had a little bit of an issue with the new AIO that I installed in. I've tried like 3 or 4 different AIOs in the baby tank trying to find the perfect one. And of course, I ended up buying a bunch of the HackRC 40 amp AIO, the red version. There's just something about this that it's the gyro, it's the feature set, it's everything comes together to make the perfect AIO for a drone like this. Also, these 4-bladed HQ prop. Now these are the same design as their 5-blade, like leaf-like design. I didn't even know they sent me these 4-bladed props until I was looking in my prop box for some props for this, and I saw, hey, what's this? 4-blade? Oh, those look just like the 5-blade that they sent me before, these little HQ prop 5-blades. The 5-blades were too much for these motors, so I ended up putting the 3 blades on, but then the 3 blades felt a little bit sluggish. Well, of course, just like Goldilocks, right in the middle is where it's at. These 4-bladed props are so quiet. I flew it a whole bunch, I flew it pretty aggressively, and the motors, when they came back, were just warm to my lip. I put my lip on it to make sure, and it was just a little bit warm, so absolutely perfect. I love getting a drone back from a good flight, checking, and the motors are not screaming hot. Really, really great. I mean, this seems to be like it can handle the 5 blades now. And that kind of, this may be a little bit of a derailment here of this video, but I've kind of noticed that a better gyro signal equates cooler motors. Now, some people may have already talked about this, and this may be common knowledge, but I've never really pinned that down exactly about where is the relationship in that. I can tell you though, that with the Flywoo, I barely could get the master multiplier above 1.0 before motors just got like really hot and everything like went south. With this one, I went all the way up to 2.0, landed it, and the motors were cool. So it's really interesting to see what the effect the gyro and a good flight controller with good capacitors. And by the way, you look at HackRC's website and they're claiming, and I'm pretty sure that they're telling the truth, that they're using the highest quality Japanese, some special name capacitors for the best of filtering. And I almost feel like that right there is part of the big success of HackRC. And like, how do we understand what's a good flight controller and what's a bad one? It may be a bit difficult for people who aren't like, who don't know PCB manufacturing, but I can tell you this, the capacitors and the quality of the capacitors on board the AIO and the ESC is so much more important than we think. That's why I've always sworn by these very expensive little Panasonic FMs that I buy, like $1 a piece. I always swear by them because I feel like I don't know, like in my use cases, when I don't use them, flight gets weird, I put one on, flight seems to clean up a little bit. And so I think the quality of your capacitors is way more important than we're putting emphasis on that. You go look at the guy Drone Mesh, where did he go? He's a great guy, I really love his videos. He was talking about the Holy Bro 65 amp, and that's actually why I bought it, was because his video, and he was talking about how good the capacitors were on it. And sure enough, in my testing, that is one of the best ESCs I've ever used for big drones. In fact, Danny over there, who bought my big boy, has 2 of them in his X8. So oh yeah, he's supposed to send me a video today of him flying. But anyways, this is what is, I would say, the absolute perfect Sub250 drone. Now, I did install the Radio Master ceramic ELRS version here because this is not a long-range drone. You're not supposed to be flying over in a mountain. And it saves a bit of weight. And so now when I put it onto the scales, it's 244 grams with the Boss LiPo battery and 245 or 46 with the Dogcom. Once all is said and done and you have the ND filter in, you're still under 250 grams because I did a lot of the weight savings and things like that across the board. This is the perfect drone, guys. Sub250 cinematic flyer. Now, there's been a lot of people that have claimed this is a cinematic drone. What was it like? Drone Captain said the Cinehawk from Emax is a cinematic drone. No. And I was talking to James today, one of my friends, and it was like, what is a cinematic drone? What makes a cinematic drone? I mean, a lot of people are throwing that around, and maybe I throw that around a bit too. But here's the answer. What makes a cinematic drone, and this was coined by James, is that the drone needs to be flying and the footage coming out of it needs to look like you're flying in 0G. You're floating along. Almost like a DJI Mavic, right? But then having the abilities of FPV and stuff like that, right? So that's what you need to have. That's a cinematic drone. Does it mean the drone's gonna be able to handle building dives and hard acro? With the Sea Dragon, yes, but pretty much everything else, no. This is not gonna be able to do building dives. You'll probably wash out pretty hard because it's a 3S drone, so the power to weight ratio is pretty low. I think it takes like 40% on the throttle to hover, which is a lot, right? No, and here's why. This drone is used for people who want to cruise on parks and fly around people with pretty much entire safety, because this is not going to hurt anyone. Don't hit someone in the face or in the hair. Yeah, sure. But like, you're not going to be hurting people if you're a confident pilot. People are going to feel safe around this drone when you're flying it. You're not going to get in trouble with the law. And most importantly, you're going to be able to make your Instagram feed look like you have a DJI Mavic FPV Avata hybrid kind of thing. It's going to be great. I know a lot of people have listened to my claims and said, oh, he's just saying that. Listen, I stand by my builds, and all my customers will tell you the same. Go talk to someone who has a drone that I built them. They'll tell you the same. I got a good record because I use these drones for myself, and I'm very strict and OCD about my flight. That's why I started designing my own drones, because I was disappointed with the stuff I was getting from GEP-RC and iFlight. And of course, I feel a lot of sense of pride and accomplishment, and that I believe I finally did that. I don't see any reason to change this design. I mean, I'm sure that there's minor improvements that can be made. Yeah, okay, there are minor improvements that can be made. Very tiny and very small. But as far as actually accomplishing what I set out to do, this is it. And yeah, guys, don't give up. Keep pushing forward. When it comes to the Sea Dragon, it's not perfect yet. And why? This thing is really easy to build and really, really easy to repair. The Sea Dragon has some of the best flight of any drone that I've ever flown of that weight class and size, with the prop guards and it's just an amazing flying drone. But if you need to repair it, it's kind of a bit of a nightmare. So I'm gonna try to address that in some future updates to it. But in the meantime, if you're looking for a Sub250 drone and you want cinematic flight, safe flight, and flight that's gonna let you fly anywhere you want without people getting annoyed at you, print this thing in pink, and this is the drone for you. You want me to build it, you can get it at drquads.com/store, or if you want to build it for yourself, you can get it on Patreon, or actually you technically can get it for free too by just going to the website and clicking on the links. It's all for free. But hopefully you might find it within your heart to sub to my Patreon as well. Guys, this is Dr. Quads, and thank you so much. I hope you guys build your own baby tank and get it out there and start flying it. I want to see just a fleet of them out there. Everyone's gonna be like, what is this new drone? Everyone's flying it. Karens are calling the cops, and the cops come by and they look at it and they say, that ain't a drone, it's a flying gimbal. Hi guys, it's Dr. Quads, and huh? This lady's like yelling at me. Oh, she thought I was recording her because like I'm holding this and it looks like a thing, but it's pointed at me. Anyways, I realized now she was saying don't record me. I'm like, I'm not recording you.